Hello, and welcome back to the channel, and to the 5th installment of the most popular series on this channel, Media Mondays, a show on the channel where I analyze, review, and rate consumable content, from movies to music and everything in between. I'll talk about it all, and put it on your screen, and at the end of every review, I will rate the piece of media I am covering as either meh, memorable, mediocre, a masterpiece, or a massive piece of shit. This will be done on a scale from 0 to 5, and it will have 4 different categories that I will rank and then average into an overall score. These categories are characters, story and plot, rewatchability, or in this case, rereadability, and the finale. Today's episode is one that I actually wasn't sure I was going to make. I had watched new movies and stuff with my friend Alexis that we were going to review together, but she can't be here today because she accidentally dropped some hot sauce on her face while getting into a fight with a very horizontally tall Ecuadorian man over a BLT sandwich or something? I don't know. So, while she's dealing with that and trying to feel better, I thought I would go on Reddit and see if I could find some inspiration while I procrastinate the fuck out of my next more serious and detailed video. A few days ago, I looked at the Bungo Stray Dogs subreddit, as I usually do, and an idea dawned on me. What if I read the story of my favorite character from the show and give my thoughts on it? And because I require the validation of strangers on the internet for my ideas, like most people do nowadays, I made a poll to see what you all wanted, and a very large percentage of the votes said that they want to see this video be made. So hey, my fellow stray dogs, this one's for you. Oh yeah, Bungo Stray Dogs is an anime where real-life authors are anime characters in this fictional universe, and instead of writing books, their famous books and works are become their special abilities, while they fight each other for an empty composition notebook. I mean, that's what they want us to think the plot is, but really, who knows? The fandom, much like the majority of the cast, is very mentally stable, and well, so am I. Also, most of the fan-favorite characters are heavily speculated on being very gay. Anyway, like I said, this is a show about authors and whatnot, and the star of this video, other than me of course, is no exception. Ryunosuke Akutagawa possesses the ability Rashomon, which means that his real-life counterpart, the author by the same name, has written a short story by the same name, Rashomon, as well. This is actually a rather popular story, as are many of Akutagawa's works in Japanese literature, and I'm sure you will understand why once I read it. And that's right, for the first time in a Media Monday episode, I'm going to read you the story, and then I will give all my thoughts afterwards. Hope you enjoyed the sound of my voice as I read this story. It's quite enjoyable, and I do recommend it, and if you like this video, I will do more Bungo Stray Dogs book reviews in the future. But, with all that said, let's get into the story of the one, the only, the Rashomon. It was a chilly evening. A servant of a samurai stood under the Rashomon gate, waiting for a break in the rain. No one else was under the wide gate. On the thick column, its crimson lacquer rubbed off here and there, perched a cricket. Since the Rashomon stands on Shujaku Avenue, few other people, at least in the sedge hat or a nobleman's headgear, might have been expected to be waiting there for a break in the rainstorm. But no one was near except this man. For the past few years, the city of Kyoto had been visited by a series of calamities, earthquakes, whirlwinds, and fires. When Kyoto had been greatly devastated, old chronicles say that the broken pieces of Buddhist images and other Buddhist objects, with their lacquer, gold and silver leaf worn off, were heaped up on the roadsides to be sold as firewood. Such being the state of affairs in Kyoto, the repair of Rashomon was out of the question. Taking advantage of the devastation, foxes and other wild animals made their dens in the ruins of the gate, and thieves and robbers found a home there too. Eventually, it became customary to bring unclaimed corpses to the gate and abandon them. After dark, it was so ghostly that no one dared approach. Flocks of crows flew in from somewhere. During the daytime, these cawing birds circled round the ridgepole of the gate. When the sky overhead turned red in the afterlight of the departed sun, they looked like so many grains of sesame flung across the gate. But on that day, not a crow was to be seen. Perhaps because of the lateness of the hour. Here and there, stone steps, beginning to crumble, and with the rank grass growing in their crevices, were dotted with the white droppings of the crows. The servant, in a worn blue kimono, sat on the 7th and highest step, vacantly watching the rain. his attention was drawn to a large pimple irritating his right cheek. As I had said earlier, the servant was waiting for a break in the rain, but he had no particular idea of what to do after the rain stopped. Ordinarily, of course, he would have returned to his master's house, but he had been discharged just before. The prosperity of the city of Kyoto had been rapidly declining, and he had been dismissed by his master, whom he'd served for many years, because of the effects of this decline. Thus, confined by the rain, he was at a loss to know where to go, and the weather had not a little to do with his depressed mood. The rain seemed unlikely to stop. He was lost in thoughts of how to make his living tomorrow, helpless, incoherent thoughts, protesting an inexorable fate. Aimlessly, he had been listening to the pattering of the rain on Sujaku Avenue. The rain, enveloping the Rashomon gate, gathered strength and came down with a pelting sound that could be heard far away. Looking up, he saw a fat black cloud impale itself on the tips of the jutting tiles out from the roof of the gate. He had little choice of means, whether fair or foul, because of his helpless circumstances. If he chose honest means, he would undoubtedly starve to death, beside the wall or in the Shujaku gutter. He would be brought to this gate and thrown away like a stray dog. If he decided to steal, his mind, after making the same detour time and time again, came finally to the conclusion that he would be a thief. But doubts returned many times. Though determined that he had no choice, he was still unable to muster enough courage to justify the conclusion that he must become a thief. After a loud fit of sneezing, he got up slowly. The evening chill of Kyoto made him long for the warmth of a jacket. The wind in the evening dusk howled through the columns of the gate. The cricket, which had been perched on the crimson lacquer column, was already gone. Ducking his neck, he looked around the gate, and drew up the shoulders of the blue kimono, which he wore over his thin underwear. He decided to spend the night there, if he could find a secluded corner sheltered from the wind and the rain. He found a broad, lacquered stairway leading to the tower over the gate. No one would be there, except the dead, if there were any. So, taking care that the sword at his side did not slip out of the scabbard, he set foot on the lowest step of the stairs. A few seconds later, halfway up the stairs, he saw a movement above. Holding his breath, and huddling cat-like, in the middle of the broad stairs leading up to the tower, he watched and waited. A light coming up from the upper part of the tower shone faintly upon his right cheek. It was the cheek with the red, festering pimple visible under his stubbly whiskers. He had expected only dead people inside the tower, but he had only gone up a few steps before he noticed a fire above, about which someone was moving. He saw a dull, yellow flickering light, which made the cobwebs hanging from the ceiling glow in a ghostly way. What sort of person would be making a light in the Rashomon, and in this storm? The unknown, evil, terrified him. As quietly as a lizard, the servant crept up to the top of the steep stairs, crouching on all fours, and stretching his neck as far as possible, he timidly peeped into the tower. As rumor had said, he found several corpses strewn carelessly about the floor. Since the glow of the light was feeble, he could not count the number. He could only see that some were naked, and others were clothed. Some of them were women, and were all lolling on the floor, with their mouths open, or their arms outstretched, showing no more signs of life than so many clay dolls. One would doubt that they had ever been alive. So eternally silent they were. Their shoulders, breasts, and torsos stood out in the dim light. Other parts vanished in the shadow. The offensive smell of these decomposed corpses brought his hand to his nose. The next moment, his hand dropped, and he stared. He caught sight of a ghoulish form bent over a corpse. It seemed to be an old woman, gaunt, gray-haired, and nunnish in appearance. With a pine torch in her right hand, she was peeping into the face of a corpse, which had long black hair. Seized more with horror than curiosity, he even forgot to breathe for a time. He felt the hair on his head and body stand on end, as he watched, terrified. She wedged the torch between two floorboards, and laying hands on the head of the corpse, began to pull out the long hairs one by one, just as a monkey kills the lice of her young. The hair came out smoothly with the movement of her hands. As the hair came out, fear faded from his heart, and his hatred towards the old woman mounted. It grew beyond hatred, becoming a consuming antipathy against all evil. And this instant, if anyone had brought up the question of whether he would starve to death or become a thief, the question which had occurred to him a little while ago, he would have not hesitated to choose death. His hatred toward evil flared up like the piece of pine wood which the old woman had stuck in the floor. He did not know why she pulled out the hair of the dead. Accordingly, he did not know whether her case was to be put down as good or bad. But, in his eyes, pulling out the hair of the dead in the Rashomon on this storming night was an unpardonable crime. Of course, it never entered his mind that a little while ago he had thought of becoming a thief. Then, summoning the strength into his legs, he rose from the stairs and strode, hand on sword, right in front of the old creature. The hag turned, terror in her eyes, and sprang up from the floor, trembling. For a small moment, she paused, poised there, then lunged for the stairs with a shriek. "Wretch! Where are you going?" he shouted, barring the way of the trembling hag who tried to scurry past him. Still, she attempted to claw her way by. He pushed her back to prevent her. They struggled, fell amongst the corpses, and grappled there. The issue was never in doubt. In a moment, he had her by the arm, twisted it, and forced her down to the floor. Her arms were all skin and bones, and there was no more flesh on them than on the shanks of chicken. No sooner was she on the floor than he drew his sword and thrust the silver-white blade before her very nose. She was silent. She trembled as if in a fit, and her eyes were opened so wide that they were almost out of their sockets, and her breath came in hoarse gasps. The life of this wretch was his now. This thought cooled his boiling anger and brought a calm pride and satisfaction. He looked down at her and said in a somewhat calmer voice, "Look here. I'm not an officer of the High Police Commissioner. I'm a stranger who happened to pass by this gate. I won't bind you or do anything against you, but you must tell me, what were you doing up here?" Then, the old woman opened her eyes, still wider, and gazed at his face intently, with the sharp red eyes of a bird of prey. She moved her lips, which were wrinkled into her nose, as though she was chewing on something. Her pointed Adam's apple moved in her thin throat. Then, a panting sound, like the cawing of a crow, came from her throat.
"I pulled the hair. I pulled out the hair to make a wig."
Her answer banished all unknown from their encounter and brought disappointment. Suddenly, she was only a trembling old woman there at his feet, a ghoul no longer. Fear left his heart, and his former hatred entered. These feelings must have been sensed by the other, the old creature, still clutching the hair that she had pulled off the corpse, mumbled out these words in her harsh, broken voice.
"Indeed, making wigs out of the hair of the dead may seem like a great evil to you, but these that are here deserve no better. This woman, whose beautiful black hair I was pulling, used to sell cut and dried snake flesh at the guard barracks, saying that it was dried fish. If she hadn't died of the plague, she'd be selling it now. These guards liked to buy from her, and used to say her fish was tasty. What she did couldn't be wrong, because if she hadn't, she would have starved to death. There was no other choice. If she knew I had to do this in order to live, she probably wouldn't care."
He sheathed his sword, and, with his left hand on its hilt, he listened to her meditatively. His right hand touched the big pimple on his cheek. As he listened, a certain courage was born into his heart, the courage which he had not had when he sat under the gate a little while ago. A strange power was driving him in the opposite direction of the courage which he had when he had seized the old woman. No longer did he wonder whether he should starve to death or become a thief. Starvation was so far from his mind that it was the last thing that would have entered it. "Are you sure?" he asked in a mocking tone, when she finished talking. He took his right hand from his pimple and, bending forward, seized her by the neck and said sharply, "Then, it's right if I rob you. I'd starve if I didn't." He tore her clothes off from her body and kicked her roughly down onto the corpses as she struggled and tried to clutch his leg. 5 steps, and he was atop the stairs. The yellow clothes that he had wrestled off her were under his arm, and, in a twinkling, he had rushed down the steep stairs into the abyss of the night. The thunder of his descending steps pounded in the hollow tower, and then it was quiet. Shortly after, the hag raised up her body from the corpses. Grumbling and groaning, she crawled to the top of the stair by the flickering torchlight, and through the gray hair which hung over her face, she peered down to the last stair in the torchlight. Beyond this was only darkness, unknowing and unknown. Quite the story, huh? Even though it was short, I think that there was a lot to unpack and understand here. So, let's get to it. Characters. In the story, Rashomon, there are 2 characters. The man who used to be the servant of a samurai, and a much older woman, whom the former found atop the Rashomon gate, along with the corpses. These 2 characters don't really get much backstory on them, but we don't really need one for the purpose of the story. Hell, we don't even know their names. But it's perfectly fine that we don't, and I will touch more on that a bit later in the video, and you'll see why. All we know is that these 2 are at Rashomon Gate in the cold, dark part of the Kyoto region of Japan. While there is no other development or information given about them, it works for the type of story that Ryunosuke wrote, and for that, I'm giving these characters a 5 out of 5 stars, which you will understand why later. Story and plot. What is the plot of Rashomon? On the surface, well, nothing. But if we peel back the onion a bit more, we can see just how multifaceted this simple story truly is. We are introduced to a man who finds himself in a rather unfortunate situation, and, due to that situation, he tells himself that he will need to hold true to his morals simply because the dishonor brought upon by the label of being a thief would be worse than a death by starvation, which he was ready and willing to accept before even turning to a life of crime, and quickly cast aside that thought. That is, however, until he met someone in a very similar circumstance to him, and he ends up changing his mind, and therefore his fate. From the way that the scenery is described, to the way that the man feels in each action that he takes in the story, everything has more than one meaning in the story, and it works to portray the tone very well. And, for the way that it does these things within the confines of such a short story, I will give Rashomon a story and plot score of 4 out of 5. Rereadability. Is Rashomon, by Ryunosuke Akutagawa, worth rereading? Yes. But it depends on how you look at it, and what you like. I like the story for the way that it portrays the human experience in such a brief yet vivid manner. However, I do wish there was more to the story, but more on that later. Some people don't like short stories due to their brevity and desire something that is a bit more slow-burning and not as rapidly conveyed like Rashomon. But even if short stories aren't your cup of tea, Rashomon is one that I would recommend anyone read at least 3 times, as I promise there will always be something new you learn about either the story or yourself within those 3 times of reading it. After the 3rd time, do what you want honestly, but Rashomon is a story that can only truly be appreciated and digested by the mind after a few good reads, and never one after the other on the same day. Space each reading out, as in like across days, of Rashomon, and you'll see what I mean by being able to digest the material like that. Rashomon is a fun story when it comes to its ability to be enjoyed. However, with its short length, I sadly cannot give it more than a 4 out of 5, simply because I hate the fact that it leaves me wanting so much more, and is unable to give me that. But I also love it for that. And damn you, Akutagawa, why did you have to go and become a vampire? Well, Vanelli. Vanelli can either make or break a piece of media, is what I like to say at the beginning of this segment of my analysis. So, let's take the ending of Rashomon and examine it under the microscope to see if it holds up for me. In the beginning, we see our main character, a man who had recently just lost his job and is contemplating both his next choices and the the seemingly last few days of his life before he inevitably dies due to starvation. The dark, overcast clouds and the downpour of rain, coupled with the deterioration of the Rashomon gate that he stands under to avoid the elements of the world around him, are used to show just how he feels and how few his options are. If he stays under the gate, yes, he may remain dry, but for how long until he needs to eat again? The animals that are usually present are absent on this night, just as the job he would have typically returned to is no longer an option for him. The man who used to be the servant of a samurai, a respected figure, now finds himself in a rather humiliating place in his life, and in the world where only the unclaimed bodies of the dead are brought to at this Rashomon gate. A body that he may become if he doesn't live very long. The man takes some time to decide on the path that he takes, to starve and die with his honor intact, or to live by turning to a life of crime by becoming a thief. After concluding on the former option and dismissing the latter as simply out of the question, he comes across a woman atop the tower. It took me my third time of reading through to realize this. This is why I said read this story multiple times, by the way. But there is a reason why the woman looks the way she does, and that is because she is the opposite of a man. Obviously, he's a man, she's a woman. While he is young and healthy, she is older, elderly, and weak. He is someone who has a moral conviction to resign his life as to not commit unnecessary acts of crime, and she is so shameless that she would steal the hairs off dead women in order to create wigs to sell them for money and food. But beyond the contrasting appearances and their ideologies, what they both share is a way to justify each. The man is selfless and thinks of others, while the woman states that if others around her are to steal, cheat, and commit various crimes simply to stay alive, then their actions are justified, so long as they can keep living. And it is this ideology that is the antithesis of what the man's moral compass is aligned to. The very idea makes him afraid of her before he even speaks to her, and once he does, he is enraged with her for acting on such selfish and self-serving beliefs with no regard for others, even dead people. However, he finally comes around to the woman's line of thinking by giving her a taste of her own medicine, by stealing from her what he needed to in order to survive, just as she stole from the others atop the same tower in order to survive herself. He is appalled by the actions of the woman, and yet, he reluctantly comes around to her same way of thinking, a cruel irony on both his part and hers, as she was probably not expecting someone to use her own words and actions against her, nor was the man who was just prior to this said that the act of stealing for personal gain in order to survive was simply out of the question. The ending of Rashomon leaves you with this. The nature of humanity is indeed a self-serving one, and even the best of intentions can be turned on their heads when challenged or when desperation presents an opportunity for it to do so. The man that once served as a samurai quickly became the thing that he swore against in the course of a few moments. And that's all it takes, really. It is indeed a grim reality, but there is always an opportunity for the opposite to happen as well. Just because that is the nature of humanity does not mean that it must become the only reason to live. Another reason why I mentioned briefly that the story doesn't have characters with names, and I feel that is on purpose. Could it be a lazy writing choice by Akutagawa? I don't think so. What I believe the real reason is as to why these characters don't have names is this. To show how one can easily place themselves in the mindset and in the shoes of this nameless character, as if it was them, and wonder what they would do if they ever found themselves in such a situation. The story is truly so brilliant, and I can't speak highly enough about it and Akutagawa's amazing writing styles. A quick aside, but this is a statement that I feel is echoed in Akutagawa's character arc in the anime, Bungo Stray Dogs. And I mention this only because a reason for living was brought up on the story. But Akutagawa is someone who was given a coat and then proceeded to commit a series of violent crimes in order to find a reason to live. Similar to the man in the story who stole a woman's coat in order to find his reason to live. However, Akutagawa, the character, he is beginning to turn towards the selfless nature of the man rather than the self-serving ideals of the woman. Just a little thing that I noticed that I thought was a little interesting note as far as Asagiri's writing in the anime and ongoing manga Bungo Stray Dogs. But like I said before, I feel like even though there are only two characters, that they capture a great image of the human experience and how certain people fall into certain lines of thinking, even though they began their path with the purest of intentions. With that said, the finale of Rashomon is an absolute 5 out of 5. I love the story, and I love Ryunosuke Akutagawa, the character, and the author of the same name. All of these scores together give Rashomon a final average of 4.5 out of 5. Truly a masterpiece in every sense of the word, if ever there was one. If you guys in the Bungo Stray Dogs community like this, I will do video essays on your favorite character's ability and book that it's based on, because this was pretty fun and I liked it a lot. I have something coming up for my favorite Ratman Fyodor and his ability, Crime and Punishment, but that is way too long to read on YouTube, so I will summarize it and break it down for you the way I did in this video. I hope you guys like the format that I did this in, because I'm going to be doing a lot more of those in the future. And to anyone else not in the Bungo Stray Dogs community, I hope you like this and also my new upcoming projects. I've been gone for a few months now, but it's good to be back and I'm ready to make more content for you all in the coming weeks. However, that's going to be where I leave off for now. Thank you for staying until the end, and a big thank you to all 74 of the voices in my head for getting me to this point. Tell me what you think about this video, and what you want to see me talk about next time. But, until that next time arrives, I'm Invisible Bill, and that's all for my spill. Like, comment, hit subscribe. You'll never know when. I never know when. But you'll see me next time.